Monsignor Moises Carmona Rivera, Pillar of Traditionalism in Mexico, Part 7. His Consecration and Ministry as a Bishop. In October 1981, the prophetic desire of Mother Maria Dolores de Jesus, MFJ, expressed to Father Carmona 3 years earlier, became a reality. Quote, I have always thought and continue to think that you should be a bishop because your love for our Lord and your valor merit it. God willing, someday this will happen. It is true that this cross is very heavy, but our Lord gives us his graces as we need them. The desire of this good religious was also the reasonable desire of some priests who, through Father Juan Carrera, had expressed to Father Carmona since 1977 the possibility of his consecration as bishop, as he made known to Gloria Riestra. Quote, Father Carrera came exclusively to propose to me that I should accept the episcopate, giving me his reasons. I answered, I do not have the stature to become a bishop, nor any capacity required for it. And he said to think about it before God and to see what I would decide. The picture you're seeing in the front shows, well, I'll just give you the headline. It says, Father Carmona, along with Father Adolfo Zamora, was consecrated to the episcopacy in October 1981 by Monsignor Bishop Thuc. That's the photo you're seeing at the front. And continue reading. It says, doubtless during all this time, approximately 4 years, he left the matter in God's hands, while he continued with the multiple occupations that were demanded of him, not only with his parish, but also the direction of Trent magazine. In the middle of this battle for the faith, undertaken by Father Carmona for almost 10 years, he took time to decide perhaps the most important decision of his life, to be consecrated a bishop. It was most assuredly a difficult decision, but judging by what happened, it was not strenuous. Father Carmona was not dazzled by investitures or power or honor that are attached to them. His long years as a parish priest had demonstrated the contrary. Precisely because he was faithful to tradition, he sacrificed honors, privileges, and even economic stability. This united to the integrity that always characterized him, speaks louder than his own words, that he did not feel attracted to episcopal dignity by reasons of vainglory. What truly convinced him were the critical circumstances that the church was undergoing and the necessity of the consecration of one or more bishops who were really Catholic to assure the apostolic succession and orthodoxy of the faith. And even if in certain moments he suggested that others be elected, Providence decided that Father Carmona should be a bishop. He was doubtless apprehensive, feeling unworthy of his election, but with the serenity and firmness of his faith, Father Carmona, together with Father Adolfo Zamora, also Mexican, flew to France in October of 1981 to receive episcopal consecration from the hands of Bishop Thuc, a traditional Vietnamese bishop. The privacy with which the consecrations were brought about was modestly accomplished without anything clouding their validity. From that day forward, Fathers Carmona and Zamora would be the most excellent bishops, Carmona and Zamora, before God and man. On October 17th, 1981, was written a historical page in the annals of the Universal Church and Mexican church history. 2 Mexican bishops decided to accept the terrible responsibility of transmitting the Catholic faith and apostolic succession to posterity. If being a pastor of souls and priest require great courage and prudence in normal circumstances, how much more are these needed in adverse circumstances? And since Father Carmona decided for tradition, his priestly life became a martyrdom by confronting the hierarchy embedded by modernism. How much greater would be his Calvary now as a bishop? His adversaries tried to discredit him in the first bulletin that Fidel Cortez, the bishop of Chilapa Guerrero, sent his faithful. It says this: "Let it be known that the priest of the Diocese of Acapulco, by name Moises Carmona, calling himself bishop, is visiting some parishes. I find myself forced to say to all that this priest cannot preach nor minister sacraments in this diocese." And about Father Carmona's person, he adds, "This person, who was once a good diocesan priest in Acapulco, is now a dissident that is trying to tear the seamless tunic of Christ with a schism." In view of these statements, Monsignor Carmona responded with an open letter in which he asked Bishop Cortez what church he is talking about. And this is as follows: "If you're referring to the Catholic Church, how without blemishing do you say that you watch over the souls of the faithful when you shamelessly collude with modernism? What else do you do when you permit lay people to distribute communion in your churches and to take it to those who are ill against Canon 845 commands, or permit that communion be distributed under both species against what Canon 852 commands? When you permit the priest to celebrate on a simple table, leaving the altar behind, against what Canon 822 commands? When you permit your priest to celebrate without cassock, and frequently even without sacred ornaments, as Canon 811 commands? When you permit concelebrations, against what Canon 803 commands? When you command or permit the celebration of Mass that is not liturgical, against what Canon 819 commands? When you permit only one Mass for various intentions, charging a complete stipend for each one of them, against what 828 commands? When you have taken away the tabernacles from the altar and have built in as mere strong boxes and walls, against what Canon 1269 commands? When you permit the faithful to receive without first going to confession, as Canon 859 commands? When you have permitted communion to be conferred upon heretics without having abjured their errors, against what Canon 731 commands? When you take part in sacred functions with non-Catholics, against what Canon 1228 commands, etc. It is clear that you don't refer to the Catholic Church, but to your church, if you still have any laws. And you say you also watch over the purity of the faith. What faith are you talking about, Your Excellency? You're undoubtedly not speaking of the Catholic faith, because it has been over 20 years that you bishops have been determined to destroy it with demonic fury. And you well know that divine truths must be believed, as also principles of behavior must be observed, that are contained in the sacred deposit that Christ gave to the apostles and their successors, together with the infallibility to be kept incorrupt. As we have seen, Monsignor Carmona defended the Church of all times, as he has always done, with arguments and ardor, but his attitude was not considered as loyalty to the faith, but precisely the contrary. This is how Monsignor Carmona's episcopal life went, from his consecration till his death, enduring attacks from one and all, defending himself and defending the faith by epistles whenever his obligations permitted it. We find a calm statement based on his episcopal consecration and the reasons he felt compelled to accept it in a letter he wrote to Mr. Alvaro Ramirez from Argentina. This letter is of great value because it seems to us to be the document in which he explains more amply the reasons for his momentous decision. This is why we permit ourselves to cite a good part of it. And this is it. It says, "My dear true friend, it is clear that in normal circumstances no bishop can consecrate licitly another bishop, but we are presently living in circumstances that are not at all normal, since they constitute a most unusual case for which nothing is clearly legislated. Three things characterize our present circumstances. Since the death of Pius XII, we have had but impostors, which means that for over 20 years the Holy See has been vacant. Almost the entire episcopacy has embarked upon a new religion, and has therefore apostatized from the true faith, renouncing the eternal church. The true faithful hunger for the word of God that is no longer being preached to them, and they are asking of us to administer the administration of the Catholic sacraments. At first we placed our hopes in Archbishop Lefebvre, in whom we saw a true Catholic bishop, a defender of the true faith, with whom the legitimate apostolic succession would continue. We have been deceived. Lefebvre has not been unaffected. We have felt betrayed seeing him making deals with the Vatican, from where all the blows against the true church have come. Although men fail, God cannot fail, nor can he abandon his church. It is for this reason that, providentially and in its proper time, the very illustrious and humble Archbishop of Huon Vietnam, with his valiant declarations, has presented to all men the disastrous state in which the Church finds herself in God's eyes. He declared the vacancy of the Holy See and the invalidity of the new Mass, binding himself as a Catholic Archbishop to do for the Church all that he can and ought to do. The episcopacy was offered to me. I had to think much about it, before I could decide, and in the end I accepted it for the sole reason of assisting in the rescue and triumph of the Church. On October 17th, Father Zamora and I were consecrated by Archbishop Thuc in a virtual catacomb, with only two distinguished doctors as witnesses. Both of us were conscious of the furious storms of protest that would come, but the words of our Divine Master encouraged us. You shall weep and lament, but the world shall rejoice, and you shall be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy. Upon our return to Mexico, the attacks began. Some said without any foundation that our consecrations were invalid because we were consecrated with the new rite. Others more serious said that based on Canons 953 and 2370, the consecrations were valid but illicit, and that consequently we were suspended. And as can be seen, our detractors were ignoring the axiom, "He who walks with the rule walks safely." They should remember, if they have forgotten, that Pope Gregory IX left 11 rules and Boniface VIII 88 for the true interpretation of the law. Now, these rules, according to Canon 20, can supply the defect of the rule in a particular case, as in the case we presently find ourselves. Consequently, the fourth rule of Gregory IX expressly states that necessity makes illicit what is illicit. The necessity of having Catholic bishops and priests and the lack of true sacraments can easily be seen. Therefore, we were validly and licitly consecrated. Rule 88 of Boniface VIII also expressly states, "It is certain that one sins against the rule who adhere to the letter and leave aside the spirit." Therefore, it is unjust to impute to the legislator a desire to greatly harm the Church during a vacancy of the Holy See by forbidding the ordination of bishops and priests and administering of the sacraments to the faithful who ask for them. Therefore, in accepting episcopal consecration from Archbishop Thuc, we have relied on these rules, conscious and certain that given the circumstances in which we live, the consecrations are both valid and licit. we are also conscious and certain that we would have sinned if, by relying on the letter of the law, we had rejected the consecrations, there being only one Catholic bishop who can now be found to transmit the episcopal succession. Please accept my most sincere affection. I beg God to continue to illuminate you so that you may continue in the battle, defending the rights of Christ and his church, now so shamelessly offended by those who have the duty of defending them, even if it be at the cost of their lives. Sincerely yours, Moises Carmona. If there's any doubt of Monsignor Carmona's honesty when he accepted his consecration as bishop, let us see what he confesses to the French priest, Father Noel Barbara, who was his detractor at the beginning. Monsignor Carmona writes this to him: I did not want to receive the consecration due to ambition for the episcopate, and still less with perverse intention of causing harm to the church, which I have always loved and for whom I have never for a moment desired to be separated. I accepted consecration with my very best will to serve in the hour that she was in the most of need of an authentic hierarchy. On the other hand, seeing that Monsignor Lefebvre was taking a wrong turn, changing his attitude, and that besides him there was no other legitimate bishop than Monsignor Thuc, and it was rash to expect a miracle, is why I accepted. God sees intentions, and he knows that my intention was honest. I put myself in the hands of our merciful God, and if there was any fault in me, I beg his forgiveness. I declare that, with his help, I will not deviate nor ever separate, even for a moment, from the Church's teaching, and I desire to continue to be faithful until the last moment of my life. And I will continue to do all the good I can, and to stand against the modern church, seizing all the souls I can. No. By the middle of 1982, in June, Monsignor Carmona, in view of the difficult circumstances of the church, decided to consecrate two new Mexican bishops, Monsignor Bravo Valdez and Monsignor Jose de Jesus Roberto Martinez y Gutierrez. This is an editorial note. At this point in his biography, Bishop Moises Carmona, Father Perez, gives a brief biological account of the two bishops, which we omit here due to the constraints of space. Continuing. As Monsignor Carmona was in full exercise of his episcopal ministry, he received a new setback from the Mexican ecclesiastic hierarchy. In March of 1983, the apostolic delegate in Mexico, Archbishop Pregón, told Monsignor Rafael Ruiz that the Sacred Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith will soon officially announce the illegitimacy of the consecrations made by Monsignor Thuc in France in 1981. Monsignor Pregone, a month later, publicly declared excommunication for the priests Moises Carmona and Adolfo Zamora and Roberto Martinez, which was published in the press. The article insists that the sacraments that said priests impart are valid but are outside the law. These declarations did not diminish Monsignor Carmona's courage. During the first half of 1983, our indefatigable bishop answered the call of a group of Catholics from Sonora that invited him to celebrate Holy Mass in Hermosillo, which he did in February and April. After his second visit, Archbishop of Sonora, Carlos Quintero Arce, made a strong and unjust declaration against Monsignor Carmona, who then sent Quintero Ars an extensive and well-founded letter in which, among other things, he clarifies to him that the Mass of St. Pius V is not just another rite of the Church, but that what was done in the Council of Trent was not to invent a Novus Ordo Missae, as was done by Vatican II, but solely to codify the Missal that had been used in Rome for many centuries, going back to the canon of the Apostle St. Peter. Now, at the end of the letter, Monsignor Carmona comes to the defense of his esteemed consecrator, clarifying to Sonora's Archbishop that Monsignor Thuc was consecrated bishop by His Holiness Pius XI, and that Paul VI made him resign because he was a hindrance to his Marxist politics. This is what Monsignor Carmona endured from the time he decided to defend the Church against the aggiornamento initiated by Vatican II, struggling on two fronts, one defending his churches and his faithful, and the other one defending tradition and his person from calumnies of which he was a target. In June of 1983, Monsignor Carmona wrote a letter to Father Barcenas, official spokesman of the bishopric, clarifying some of the fallacies that had been published in the press. After showing him that truth is not guaranteed by the majority, Monsignor Carmona asks him how he dares to call him an apostate, and disputes as follows. Quote, Father Blandino, in no way have I departed from the Catholic religion, which is the only real Christian religion, and I have not rejected anything of the faith that I have received in my baptism, nor have I adopted any other strange religion. I am not an apostate because I follow the Church of all times, as did all the confessors, doctors, martyrs, and all the faithful that existed before the nefarious Vatican II Council. Our zealous bishop also made time to smooth out differences that arose among some traditionalist groups by means of letters. This was the case of a group from Yankton, whom Monsignor Carmona exhorted to remain united. Quote, and as charity is the binding element that can unite us all, I beg God, with all my soul, this virtue will so abound in the necessary manner that we will not see ourselves as strangers but as brothers. The Christmas mood brought into Father Carmona's troubled heart his desire of a divine peace that would console his afflicted parishioners. In a beautiful essay entitled Navidad, Navidad, Monsignor Carmona manifests to us that aside from possessing sentiments of valor and fortitude, he also possessed the kindness and tenderness of profoundly religious man. Christmas, Christmas, your name has the charm that enraptures, delights, and makes the entire world fill with joy, something divine that brings happiness. After speaking theologically and beautifully about how God prepared humanity to receive the incarnate Word, he finishes with a petition. We want your peace, Lord, the one proclaimed by the angels, not the peace of slaves. We don't want the peace that degrades and debases. We want your peace that enables and dignifies. Grant it, Lord. Indeed, God had awarded Monsignor Carmona the peace he solicited some time before, but of course not as the world would grant it. Monsignor Carmona enjoyed a peace of soul with the knowledge he had of being faithful to Christ and his church. It was others, however, who would not leave him in peace. In May of 1984, the parish priests of, this is a difficult word to pronounce, Zoctolica Guerrero, I'll just say Guerrero from now on, sent a newsletter to his faithful telling them not to follow Monsignor Carmona, nor to enter the church that his faithful had built in Guadalupe, Victoria, which prompted Monsignor Carmona to refute him, as he was accustomed to do, by letter. Concerning the accusations that the priest made to Monsignor Carmona, that he attacked the papacy, our bishop responded, quote, "We are not against the papacy. We have always been fervent lovers of the Pope and for them. Who are vicars of Jesus Christ? We would give our whole lives." These attacks that doubtlessly wounded Monsignor Carmona's soul seemed to be his daily bread. In September of the same year, the Bishop of Chilapa, Jose Maria Hernandez Gonzalez, issued a bulletin in his diocese in which he makes public declaration of the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, March 12, 1983. In it, Cardinal Ratzinger pointed out that in virtue of the illegitimacy of the ordinations made by Monsignor Thuc, he does not recognize them, the consecrated and consecrator, and excommunicates them. All these insults did not weaken Monsignor Carmona's combative spirit. Instead, he defended himself. In November of 1984, determinedly refuted the insults that an anonymous reporter dared to write in the official newspaper of the Archdiocese of Hermosillo. And after rejecting the insults one by one, Monsignor Carmona explains, quote, "Everything I do as a Catholic bishop is in accord with the Catholic Church teaching and has commanded always." The attacks Monsignor Carmona received that year in 1984 ended with a final touch. His enemies seemed to have tired of throwing their darts against our bishop. Far from intimidating him, they seemed only to inflame his courage. For this reason, they went from words to acts. What acts? Let Monsignor himself relate them to us. On the 24th of September of the year that is ending, going to Guadalupe, Victoria, to attend to the Catholics there, as they had solicited me to assist them in their spiritual needs, having driven about 8 or 10 kilometers after Omniptec at about 4:30 in the morning, more or less, we stopped before a puddle of water. We heard an explosion. The shot was right on. They punctured one of the back tires of the Jeep. Then 5 individuals surrounded us, pistol in hand. They forced us out of the Jeep and made us carry our belongings, and they made us go deep through puddles, prickles, and wire fences until we got to a place chosen by them. They searched and stripped us of everything. This is what Monsignor Carmona wrote to Archbishop of Acapulco, Rafael Bello, informing him of the events. With his particular way, Monsignor Carmona questions him, saying, "I imagine that Your Excellency knows well who the author of this assault is, because such brilliant undertakings must not be ignored to obtain a future promotion. I'm inclined to believe that this was a mutual agreement." After providing concrete data, Monsignor Carmona deduced that Father Nazario and Father Calgaro were involved in the assault, although the responsible party is another, and Your Excellency knows who. Disconcerted by such violent actions, Monsignor Carmona asks himself why those in the new church that defend Vatican II so much apply the well-known, quote, religious liberty for the Jews, Buddhists, Protestants, free thinkers, etc., while, quote, for us, we have decided to stay with the church that is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, and for those who have returned to it, this liberty does not exist. For us, defamation, lies, violence. To conclude, Monsignor Carmona details the amount of the assault. It says, "They stole my pastoral ring, very esteemed by me because it was a gift given to me by the traditional clergy, traditional Catholics of Germany, on the day of my consecration. They robbed me of a new automatic Canon camera, my watch, my simple pectoral cross, 14,000 pesos in cash that I carried with me in case we encountered an accident on the road. And asking Bishop Bello to intervene, he questions him as follows. In the old, essentially theocratic theology, the theocentric theology, we were inculcated with an unforgettable principle, either restitution or condemnation. But I do not know if this principle is still valid in the new, essentially anthropocentric theology. If Your Excellency intervenes favorably in this distressing matter, I'm profoundly be grateful. The last epistolary defense Monsignor Carmona made this year was the one he made against the newsletter that was made public by the Bishop of Chilapa in September. In it, our bishop points out, the custody of the holy deposit of faith and sacred doctrine pertain to you, and also to remove from the church all profane intervention, forcefully and with courage against those that want to violate the rights of the Holy See. How did you guard this sacred deposit? With what profane novelties have you not filled the church? Instead of defending those souls of whom you are pastors, you gave them to the wolves. You did not feed them with the delicious pasture of divine truth, but you filled them with indigestible and hurtful food. By 1985, Monsignor Carmona was invited by the faithful traditionalists to visit the city of Osaka and to speak at some conference to counteract the bad publicity the members of liberation theology were promoting in the region by its leaders, Leon Reyes, Camara, Samuel Ruiz, and Bartolome Carrasco. These invitations were only some drops of honey among the usual bitter injuries Monsignor Carmona received from his enemies. A month later, one of his furious adversaries, the newspaperman Nemesio Rodriguez, wrote in El Heraldo, if I'm saying that right, newspaper, a grotesque article in which he abusively disqualifies Monsignor Carmona, accusing him of being proud, a bad priest, quote, this guy, freeloader, and mentally unstable. He actually alleged that Monsignor Carmona made up the story about the Jeep that had recently been stolen. Now, filled with indignation by this article, Monsignor Carmona, who was not a novice in these matters, immediately wrote a letter to this base journalist in which he uses sarcasm to respond to this diatribe. It is such a well-written work with such brilliant style, and immediately shows in it the fine education and great culture of this excellent writer and eminent newspaperman. You said that, quote, this guy calls himself a bishop, has not thought of naming anybody his superior. But if he would think about it, you can be very sure that the only one he would name would be the illustrious newspaperman Nemesio Rodriguez Olis, who because of his great knowledge, may accompany the eminent stall Father Carmona, because of his lack of equilibrium, is being requested from many places, from La Paz, Tijuana, Ensenada, Hermosillo, Chihuahua, and others, that he may celebrate the Catholic Mass for them and administer also the Catholic sacraments. And these people are groups of professionals. When the year of 1986 was beginning, Monsignor Carmona wrote his old teacher, the Canon Andres Campo, reproaching him for dictating excommunication against the humble inhabitants of San Juan Tetlacingo for the grave crime of having participated in Holy Mass that he celebrated there. He concludes, I am sure of not being wrong when I am faithful to the Church of all times, to the church of the 263 legitimate popes and of the 20 authentic ecumenical councils. I believe that neither Christ nor the Holy Spirit abandoned for a second his church during the almost 20 centuries that it has existed. This is my faith, and I want to die in it. Let the 3 bishops of Guerrero that conspire against me and try to destroy me know it. The firmness of Monsignor Carmona in defense of the faith seemed not to diminish with his age, nor with his apostolic journeys, nor with the persecutions. Monsignor Carmona's adversaries made war against him with everything. As he was from Guerrero, he defended himself with everything. The whole diocese went against him and against Monsignor Bravo and the faithful, excommunications and infernal penalties, as Monsignor Carmona said. Our bishop defended his people and his churches with the firmness with which a mother defends her children. This is good for you to consider, to understand why Monsignor Carmona fought in this manner. To start, he was a priest ardent of God and his church, zealous for his faith and souls, fierce as a Spanish or Aztec Indian soldier. And if this was not enough, he was totally convinced of the malignity of modernism. What can we expect from a man like this? Exactly what Monsignor Carmona did and said. This is how he reprimanded Father Silvino Moreno. Permit me to ask you what right or what authority you have to threaten with excommunication and infernal penalties those who prefer the Catholic Mass and not the heretic Mass you celebrate. What you are doing is a crime, separating the people from the true faith, conducting them in a universal apostasy. Mitchelton has been a devout and singularly pious town, and as far as I'm concerned, you cannot prevent me from going to Mohitlán as many times as I desire. Wherever there may be a group of Catholic faithful to the true church, there I will be, whatever the costs may be. Indeed, Monsignor Carmona spared no effort to visit his towns, no matter how far away they were. Neither the climate, nor the night, nor fatigue would impede our bishop to travel, even at dawn, to spiritually assist his faithful. We know that he did this even from the beginning. His most closely related faithful have given testimony of his intense missionary activity. Moreover, one example is enough. And in July of 1986, Father Manuel Ojeda sent Monsignor Carmona, quote, the list of the visit that should be accomplished, God willing, in the month of August. The itinerary is as follows. We will be waiting for you in Zacualpan on Wednesday, the 20th of August at 8 a.m. There you will bless the church dedicated to the Holy Cross. You will offer Mass and give confirmations. That same day you will go to, God willing, Guerrero between 1 and 2 p.m., where you will set the foundation stone to the chapel that, God willing, will be built on the little hill. Of course, the faithful desire that you celebrate Mass on the little hill. I know this is very tiring for you, but this is only every time you come. And you will have lunch at Guerrero, and then the family of Mr. Rafael Silva will be waiting for you with open arms, as always, in La Cienega. There you'll have dinner and sleep. In the morning, you'll depart for Arroyo Nuevo, where you will be expected by the communities of Plain de Maguey and Arroyo Nuevo Plain Muerto. There you will bless the church in Plain de Muerto, where you will celebrate Holy Mass. This is now Thursday, 21st of August. At midday, they will be waiting in Plain de Pierna to greet you, and by afternoon, they will be waiting for you in Los Lirios, where they would also like to greet you. And by the afternoon of that same day, you will arrive in Guadalupe, Victoria, where you will dine and rest. And the following day, that is the 22nd of August, the feast of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, you will preside over the procession, celebrate Mass, and give confirmations. That's a lot. There were no limits for his intense apostolate, neither his state nor the boundaries of his country, and by 1987 he accepted the invitation made to him by some faithful Bolivians, directed by Professor Jose Ernesto Carreras, to visit their country. Monsignor Carmona, accompanied by two patriots and friends, newspaperman Enrique Salinas and engineer Gustavo Urinella, visited the city of Santa Cruz, Bolivia, where at his arrival he exhorted them to return to the true Catholic faith. He emphatically finishes, "We cannot change God's religion for man's religion. We are faithful to the divine truth that the Catholic Church indefectibility teaches." Monsignor Carmona did not want to say goodbye to Bolivia without insisting, quote, "I exhort the faithful of Bolivia to return to the true Catholic faith and not to permit it to be snatched from you. Join the traditional Catholic group of La Santa Cruz." Monsignor Carmona was welcomed with great affection by his faithful. Of course, the declarations made by Monsignor Carmona to the Bolivian press would be rapidly discredited. The Archbishop of that region, Luis Rodriguez, considered Monsignor Carmona as an impostor because his name did not appear on the list of bishops of the Pontifical Annual. And aside from this, his declarations against the modern religious hierarchy, quote, demonstrate that he is not in communion with the Catholic Church. What was unique about Monsignor Carmona's declarations in Bolivia was that they were made in their own press office of the prefecture, where at his arrival in the city, he was presented by Professor Carreras. What courage Monsignor Carmona had. He introduced himself and set a fire in the adversary's house. This is how our bishop was. He was not deterred by any obstacle. In the same year of 1987, in March, Monsignor Carmona traveled to Hermosillo to ordain a priest in a place called San Pedro el Suarcito. In that city, in the residential district of Lomas de Madrid, he also celebrated Holy Mass and confirmed a group of children. Concerning the attacks leveled against him by the Archbishop of Sonora, Monsignor Carmona stated, "The opinions of Archbishop Quintero Arce have nothing to do with me. Those who have abandoned Catholic teaching cannot excommunicate those of us who remain loyal." At the beginning of 1988, Monsignor Carmona sent another vehement letter, this time to Father Gustavo Garrison, parish priest of San Luis Actlan. He indignantly rebukes him for, on December of the previous year, flinging excommunications and insults to the faithful who had assisted at Mass celebrated by him. Disconcerted, Monsignor Carmona asks him, "I don't understand why so much hate for so holy a Mass, so divine, that so many saints celebrated, and which filled heaven with saints. Can you tell me where the sinfulness is, and when was it a crime to celebrate it or to assist? Can it be possible that a holy pope, as St. Pius V, could have ordered, with no scruples of conscience and without incurring any penalty, to use in perpetuity a missal that, according to you and those of your kind, is sinful? Not only do you judge it to be sinful, but you even fling excommunications, ridiculous of course, at those present at that Mass." After Monsignor Carmona presents to Father Garrison the arguments of why he does not apply religious liberty, so much defended by Vatican II, and thus leave traditionalists in peace, he compares his treatment to those of other religions. Jehovah's Witnesses and other heretics travel across all the streets of San Luis Alton, visiting house by house. They go to all the towns, and you don't bother or say anything. but God forbid them from assisting at a Catholic Mass, because then most certainly you become furious and explode. Now, 3 weeks later, our tireless bishop again defended himself arduously from the attacks that Father Luis Acevedo flung against him. Concerning Father Acevedo's attitude about his false episcopal investure, Monsignor Carmona firmly points out, "It's not false. I am a true bishop, even though unworthy and full of miseries, and only because of a special grace of God that makes use of rubbish to accomplish his designs. If you call those of the Catholic religion of a rebellious religion, the one that you professed before, we want to be rebels as the martyrs were rebels, that stood up before the despots, bravely confessing their faith. My love, my respect, my obedience have always been and will be for the legitimate successors of St. Peter and the legitimate successors of the apostles. This is to say, for the true church." He does not wish to finish his letter before recognizing the perseverance of the faithful. Quote, "The Catholics at Atempa are unwavering. In spite of the war the progressive priests from Chilapa waged toward them, launching all the town's inhabitants against them. The towns of Dos Caminos has suffered much and continues to do so." Towards the middle of that same year, Monsignor Carmona answered one of his many inflamed adversaries. In his accustomed style, he gave the lie to each one of the fallacies that they were spreading against him. As far as the accusations of Father Thomas, a parish priest of Trinita, toward Monsignor Carmona about being on the prowl, he explains, "If by this expression you want to imply that I am not subject to any authority, you must know that I am bound, very well bound, to the church that Christ instituted as the column and foundation of truth. And as to," quote, "his going out to the towns in search of money," Monsignor Carmona answers, "A thief believes everybody steals. Because you inconsiderately exploit your poor faithful, you believe everybody does the same. But you're wrong. We do not search for money, although we need it very much. And we look for those poor souls from whom the faith is being taken without compassion. Those souls that are being Protestantized by you, without them knowing it." He finally points out about his apostolic labors. "I feel obliged to go to these towns that are abandoned and shout out to all and to every one of the faithful the same shout that St. John. Quote, 'Let that which you have heard from the beginning abide in you. If what you have heard from the beginning abide in you, you shall also abide in the Son and the Father.'" At the beginning of 1989, Father Jose de Pineda wrote Monsignor Carmona to wish him happiness on his priestly golden anniversary and to ask him more time to decide about the invitation that Monsignor Carmona had made to invite with him. Father de Pineda ends his letter, quote, "Take good care of yourself, and may the angel St. Raphael protect you in all your trips through the mountains and other itineraries." That year of 1989 would be an unforgettable year for Monsignor Carmona. In October of that year, God permitted him to celebrate his priestly jubilee, 50 years as a priest. What a blessing. And more so, in that they had been lived so intensely in the service of God. He surely celebrated this extraordinary event with a Thanksgiving Mass and with a secular celebration. In a letter to Mr. Sesma, he speaks about it. On 29th of October, I celebrated my priestly jubilee. My 8 priests accompanied me. The church is big and spacious, and that day packed with the faithful, desiring to see what they had not seen in 20 years, a pontifical Mass. On this occasion, he received many congratulations from foreigners, among whom were those of Monsignor Vida Elmer, Bishop George J. Musi, and the Catholic magazine St. Pius V, Solitatis. In May of 1990, Monsignor Carmona sent a letter to North American priests that had recently arrived as missionaries. In it, Monsignor Carmona tried to dissuade them from giving communion to people standing or in their hand because of the grave sacrilege that this signifies. He offered them historical data in this argument, showing them that there were two Masonic priests of the 19th century, Roca and Dr. Bolta, who even then were planning this paganizing attitude in order to remove from the faithful their faith in the divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. He follows by declaring, quote, "Consciously or unconsciously, you have been vile instruments of Freemasonry. Where is that faith and piety with which the faithful frequently came forward to receive Holy Communion? The Eucharist in the new church is not sacred anymore. It has become only a sign of universal fraternity, as the Masons intended." A month later, Monsignor Carmona receives a letter from the municipal commissioner of Dos Arroyos, jurisdiction of Acapulco, who wrote this: "By this letter, all citizens of this community, including the municipal authorities, we beg your voluntary collaboration as a worthy pastor of the authentic Church of Christ, supporting us in religious services that for more than 10 years have been abandoned by Mr. Rafael Bello Ruiz. And we see that Protestant sects have been flourishing because faith has been diminishing because of the lack of attention to our Catholic faith from the main authority of the Diocese of Acapulco, Mr. Rafael Bello Ruiz. We hope for a favorable answer as soon as you may consider it possible. Receive our most sincere appreciation." Shortly thereafter, Monsignor Carmona wrote to the canon of Chalapo Guerrero, Justino Salmeron, who days before had sent a copy of an old letter to Monsignor Carmona and had written to the mitre. He did with the purpose of making him, Monsignor Carmona, see that he was not the same as he was when he wrote the said letter. We believe it is interesting to refer to part of it, so the reader may confirm the intimate thoughts and sentiments of our bishop. He writes to his old associate: "You are wrong, Father Tino. You are wrong. I am totally the same and haven't changed at all. The faith that impelled me before is the same that encourages me today, only more ardently and passionately. And I would rather fall down to the floor broken in pieces than permitting it to be snatched away or lost. I am faithful to the church that from childhood was made known to me as the only one that Christ instituted. I believe and have always believed that it is perfect, and perfect as he instituted it, must remain to the end of the world. You, like me, had knowledge of the same church. You and I studied the same catechism, and in the seminary studied the same sacred theology. How is that you let yourself be dazzled by the changes that took place? Do you believe that the 262 legitimate successors of St. Peter were deceiving us for almost 20 centuries? We find ourselves now in July 1991, only 3 months before the death of Monsignor Carmona. And we find him, in spite of his 79 years of age and his many tribulations, as he always was, vehemently fighting for the Catholic faith and his church. To letter number 587 that Bishop Bello published, Monsignor Carmona fiercely responded to his old colleague. Father Rafael Bello, you have publicly said I caused confusion and that I spread heresy. Don't be fooled, Rafael. Don't be a fool. The confusion and heresies that so frighten you are the cause of your work and of all those that, like you, have apostatized from the true faith. The confusion and heresies have gushed as if out of a fountain, and from the council that for you was the most dogmatic and glorious of all councils, Vatican II. Confusion and heresies have come from Rome, the Rome that has betrayed her divine spouse. She has made herself the concubine and lewd quartet with all those who, totally ignorant of the true God, remain on their knees before false divinities, invented by themselves. He said this last part, marking reference to the prophecies of the Virgin Loiselette when she announced that Rome would lose the faith.